Hey y'all, welcome back to our channel. I'm Matt Digman.
And I'm Ryan Roddy.
We're the authors of the epic sci-fi fantasy space opera novel, The Dark That Dwells.
And the creators of the series Doctoring the Books.
As many of you know, we're indie authors, and we are quickly approaching the 1-year anniversary of the publication of our debut novel.
In this self-publishing series, we're sharing the tips and tricks we've learned about each aspect of the publishing journey from our own experience with The Dark That Dwells.
In our first video on this subject, we discussed the factors that led to our decision to self-publish.
Today, we're going to talk to you about one of the most crucial steps in the process for getting your novel ready for its grand debut: editing. Let's face it, in the book world, a stigma exists that self-published novels are somehow inherently inferior to their traditionally published counterparts.
What the f***?
While in recent years this has become less universally accepted as more and more talented and professional writers elect to pursue the indie route, the transgressions of a few writers past, and sometimes present, have made this bias somewhat difficult to overcome.
And when critics address the distinction between publishing approaches, they most often point out any obvious discrepancies in quality of editing to support their case.
This issue is likely twofold. First, professional editing can be expensive. Very expensive.
And while it comes standard with a traditional publishing deal, when you're self-publishing, you're the one footing the bill for this and every other stage of the process.
Secondly, the relative ease with which you can self-publish a novel these days means that some authors click submit before they have a truly finished product.
Nailed it! So if there's one thing you take away from today's video, it should be this. If you want your book to compete on the level with traditionally published titles, it's going to require a significant investment of time, effort, and money.
When trying to decide how to allot your resources and your budget, recognize it will be glaringly obvious in your finished product if your editing is lacking. Do not skimp here or you will likely regret it forever.
So, you're curious about what editing really is? Well, let's break down the main types.
Self-editing is the first step in the process and usually encompasses all the other types, as you reflect on your novel and make any necessary changes, both large and small.
One piece of advice that's repeated over and over is to take some time between finishing your novel and coming back to it with your editing cap on. For one thing, finishing a novel is a huge accomplishment and it should be celebrated. Treat yourself, have a cocktail, give your magnum opus some space and let it breathe. Then, revisit it with clear eyes and a fresh perspective, not so mired in the newness of its completion that you can't see the forest for the trees.
Once you're ready, there are many different ways to approach this step. Ultimately, it's a trial and error process where you find out what methods work best for you.
Some people like to write their marketing copy or story summary before diving into edits to make sure that they've really got their story's focus clarified. Others like to have the entire work printed and go through it with a red pen. Figure out whatever best helps you approach your work as an editor, rather than the writer, in order to make it as polished as possible before enlisting next-level assistance.
Developmental editing is the big picture approach to your story.
Nitpicky things like spelling, grammar, and punctuation aren't the focus here. Instead, this phase focuses on the larger, overarching elements of the novel, including plot, structure, characterization, pacing, and overall presentation and flow of the story. Developmental edits can also ensure consistency in elements like viewpoint, narrative style, and story tense.
This type of editing is best done early on in the process, after you've completed the requisite rounds of self-edits. While developmental editing might be somewhat difficult for an author to do independently, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to hire professional help here if your budget is limited. If you have access to a strong writers group or pool of beta readers, they may be able to help you with this type of feedback and ultimately achieve a similar result.
Copy editing and line editing are the more detail-oriented types of editing.
The terms are sometimes combined or used interchangeably, but in their purest forms, you can think of copy editing as more mechanical, focusing on the minutiae of spelling, grammar, punctuation, etc., while line editing is more stylistic, helping you achieve your best prose.
Copy and line editing happen after your story itself has been structurally edited, rewritten, and is otherwise ready to go. If your budget is tight, you may want to pursue alternative methods for developmental edits and invest your editing allotment here instead, given just how important it is.
proofreading is your final step in revisions before your book's publication.
It's that last quality control check and is meant to pick up any remaining spelling or grammatical errors or other typos that may have been missed in the previous stages.
It also generally occurs after your book's been formatted for publication, so proofreading can help pick up any errors or inconsistencies in layout too.
While most errors will have been found prior to this step, this is another one you really don't want to skimp on if possible.
Once you're well versed in the different types of editing and you've assessed your individual needs, it's time to find a top-notch editor to work with you on your project.
Joanna Penn from The Creative Pen has compiled an excellent resource for authors of recommended editors. Here, she highlights Readsy, New York Book Editors, and eBook Launch, followed by an extensive list of additional organizations and individual editors that have been highly recommended and encompass all the editing types. She's done an incredible job, so check out her list for yourself by visiting thecreativepen.com/editors.
After reviewing recommendations and researching the options, we chose to find an editor via Readsy. We were impressed by their competitive vetting process of high-quality professionals having to meet some fairly selective criteria in order to be featured on their marketplace. But more on our process later.
The exact cost to edit your specific book is difficult to predict, and it depends on a variety of factors. Here are just a few to be aware of.
Editors can charge for their service either per hour of work or by word count, though it seems these days the vast majority follow the word count model. The type of editing varies in its cost too, understandably, with the developmental editing costing the most and proofreading being the least expensive on the spectrum.
Your genre and your book's general readiness will factor in too, as well as the editor's level of experience.
Readsy has a great calculator tool available on their website where you can plug in your book's details and estimate the average cost for a book of your size in your genre. We'll link this and some other helpful pricing info in the description box below.
With an estimated 57% of books published ranging from 50,000 to 100,000 words, it's probably safe to budget anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for editing your novel if you're limiting things to copy/line editing and proofreading.
That may be a tough pill to swallow, but trust us, it's worth it. And remember the old adage, no pain, no gain.
So, bearing all this in mind, what did we choose to do for The Dark That Dwells?
Well, for starters, we were our own developmental editors.
One benefit of having two authors was that it meant having two built-in editors when the time came. Working through the chapters together allowed us to find issues a single person might have overlooked.
But with The Dark That Dwells being our first novel, we still had a lot to learn about our process overall.
We knew a lot of the major plot points we wanted to happen, but many of the smaller things weren't as planned out. As a result, that meant much more developmental editing poured into the process early on.
That's already something we're doing differently as we write the next book in the series. More meticulous plotting on the front end, and really focusing to get things down on the page without getting bogged down in editing until later. More plotting, less pantsing.
So, while it's difficult to assign a specific duration to our editing time, the combined writing, developmental edits, and rewrites for The Dark That Dwells took place from fall 2015 to spring of 2018.
In September of 2018, we began our search for an editor on Readsy and quickly decided to work with Lisa Gilliam, who we cannot recommend highly enough, especially for sci-fi/fantasy genres. We provided her with a writing sample, and based on her assessment, she recommended light copy editing, and we contracted her for a 6-week collaboration.
As is often the case with freelance editors, she was already booked months in advance, so we got on her schedule for December 2018, and she completed her edits by January 2019. She provided us with a complete manuscript with tracked changes of all the revisions and comments for us to review. She also gave us a style sheet as a reference for the basis of her editorial decisions.
We spent most of 2019 learning everything we could about self-publishing and book marketing, so it wasn't until early fall of that year that we decided to do some additional edits.
We decided that even for space opera, The Dark That Dwells was a little on the lengthy side, and after we reread it, we felt there was some fictional fat we could trim. So we went through one more round of self-edits and were able to cut our count by about 11,000 words before getting our book all ready for formatting.
After formatting was complete in early 2020, we went through the meticulous process of proofreading the book cover to cover, more than once in fact. And we did find several errors, some that were the result of the formatting process itself, and a few that had been inadvertently overlooked when we cut down our word count.
One thing we found throughout this process is how helpful it can be to read your book out loud. That's a tip we cannot recommend enough, especially if you're doing self-edits for some of the rounds like we did. It was absolutely invaluable and helped us catch a lot of things we'd missed previously.
We're trying out new methods now, but looking back, we can see that we spent a lot of time editing instead of writing the first go-round.
One paragraph could hang us up for hours as we tried to get the feel just right. Some chapters, with an average word length of, say, 4,000 words, might take us a month to write. Then we'd go through another 2 or 3 edits before we moved on. It took a while to get to the next chapter.
Now, we're focusing on writing a chapter and doing only minor copy edits so we can keep on moving.
This lets us focus on storytelling and on meeting our self-inflicted deadlines. It means we're that much closer to figuring out which ideas are going to work and which ones aren't, instead of realizing a year from now that we have to rewrite an entire act, one we had already spent way too much time editing in the moment.
It's far easier to kill your darlings before they're perfect and polished.
Don't be afraid to silence your inner editor in order to maintain your forward momentum. Hopefully, this overview to editing and self-publishing provided you with some helpful tips to tackle your own project.
Be sure to check out the resources in the description box, and remember, you can always comment below or email us for any specific questions you may have.
If you're enjoying learning about our self-publishing journey and you want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell icon for notifications so you don't miss when the next video in the series drops.
And with that, we'll see y'all next time.
Bye!